Mayor, you're muted.
You're muted, Mayor.
Nobody wants to hear what I have to say anyways. But welcome. This is the City Council meeting of March 11th, 2021. Ms. Felica, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Pons.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Here.
Mr. Maslin.
Here.
So you all have the minutes of February 8th and February 11th. Are there any amendments or corrections? Or I think Mr. Maslin, you had a comment.
Yes, I know we've got a note at the bottom of our meeting minutes that they're not verbatim, and for details, people can actually refer to the digital recordings of the meeting minutes. But I think in the case where we had the discussion on the Police Chiefs Advisory Committee, where it came in as a recommendation and looked for our comments, and then the original plan was that he would report back. I think it would be good to memorialize that at that meeting we actually endorsed his proposal with one recommendation in terms of oversight of selecting the members, and gave him the green light to go ahead. And so maybe if something like that could be reflected in the minutes, that would be good.
Okay. And I believe, Sandy, you've had the opportunity to make some changes.
They'll be made before I bring them to you for signature. Yes.
Okay. So I'm okay. I'm comfortable with the with Mr. Maslin's comments, and happy to have those added to the minutes.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions or concerns?
So I move we approve the meeting minutes for the February work session and City Council meeting as discussed here.
Second.
Mr. Rogers.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
Okay, so looks like we have no public hearings on the agenda, so that moves us forward to the reports. And item A is monthly departmental operating reports. Mr. Trivett, anything you want to?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you guys remember that we told you at the budget retreat that we were reworking the departmental operating report website. That's still a work in progress. So yeah, all of the information is current, but we will be making that change in the near future.
Thank you.
I did have a comment.
Yes, sir.
So several months ago in department reports, we drilled down into the public safety section and looked at the auto accidents statistics. And in light of the fact that the lead article in the Gazette yesterday was fatal crashes increased amid the pandemic, I just wanted to maybe highlight some comments there and realize that the chief's not available for this meeting. Maybe at the next meeting he could come up with any of his thoughts. But our crash reduction goal, the specific goal of reducing auto accidents with injuries, our goal for this year is 157, and actually 164, under 164. Year to date has been 57 compared with our goal to year to date of last year of 157. So we're really seeing like a 64% decrease. And we discussed before that a lot of that could be attributed to COVID in terms of less traffic on the roads. The lead article in the Gazette says that we had our first fatality crash within 6 years during the pandemic. When I went onto the DMV website, it looked like that the only fatality that I was seeing in Williamsburg was for 2019. So we might be able to clarify that next month. The article also claims that in Williamsburg, the most concentrated crash sites occurred at the intersection of Richmond Road and Boundary Street, which those of us who actually live here know that as College Corner. Also along Lafayette Street and along Bypass Road. And most of us know that the severe accidents along Bypass Road have been actually in York County. And unfortunately, the article did not break out anything for York County, although it did mention James City County, New Kent, King and Queen, but not York County. So I think we could maybe clarify that. The picture that we're shown on the front page gives the caption of those 3 areas where the crashes are most concentrated. However, and I'm sure that the Gazette has plenty of file footage for College Corner, but the photo they're showing is actually in James City County, and it's the intersection between the AutoZone Jersey Mike's strip mall and the Target Publix shopping center. So I think that could be confusing a lot of our residents as to why that's associated with it. And then unfortunately, when we're looking at auto safety, there are a lot of issues that really also need to be discussed, including the pedestrian injuries, which we really have a focus on reducing, distracted driving, especially the countermeasures the state come up with, the new law effective January 1 against holding a cell phone while driving. And just as importantly, Virginia's move over law, which requires motorists to move over one lane to avoid stopped vehicles with emergency lights flashing. And we know that this was a factor in the death of Hanover Fire Lieutenant Brad Clark 2 years ago, and most recently may have been a factor in the death on 199 in James City County. So with all these in mind, maybe we could discuss with Chief Dunn that it might be helpful to have like an annual motor vehicle or traffic safety report for the city of Williamsburg, where we could actually have information that's accurate and useful to our residents and help really educate them. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments about the operating reports? Okay, seeing none, we'll go on to the city manager's report. And I know Andrew's chomping at the bit to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I did want to just show one thing today, if that's okay.
Sure.
Let me share my screen here. Always an adventure. All right, so hopefully you all can see my screen. I just wanted to put up on the screen a website that we're currently deploying. If the citizens are not familiar, our city website has been totally revamped. It should be a much more enjoyable experience. It's certainly much more pleasing to the eye. If they have suggestions as they look at that new website, we'll be glad to take them. A website is always a work in progress. But as we move into budget season in earnest, wanted to have sort of a centralized location where people could find all the information about the budget that's in development, which is FY22. And so we've constructed this page. You can find sort of a brief on where we are in terms of the budget process right now and what our thoughts are. You can also find at the budget retreat, we talked about doing a letter to the residents. That's another work in progress. Hopefully that will go out next week. That will be posted here as well. And then there are a couple of tools at the bottom that I really wanted to highlight. The first one is Balancing Act, which allows a resident to put themselves in the driver's seat of the budget and adjust things up, down, including in the revenues, but also in the expenses. There are these little tooltip buttons that you can click on that explain what each revenue is and what each expense is and what the ramifications are of changing those. So it's a very robust tool. And then the great part is that when you've adjusted the budget and you're satisfied with it, it shows you whether or not you're in balance or not and by how much. You can save that and send it to us as a point of review. So you can send us comments on adjustments that you've made and why you think they're important. Then the next one is the tax receipt. And this one I think is even more powerful for a resident. On this tool, what you can do is when you click on it, it asks you some very basic questions. The first is, what's the value of your home? And then the second question is, what's the value of your vehicles? And if you own more than one home, you can add as many as you have. Same thing with the cars. And so once you put those numbers in, it calculates what your tax bill is for both personal property and for real estate tax. And then it breaks down that tax into the various component areas of expenses the city has so that you can see how much of the money you're paying goes to each item. So in other words, if you're paying a total tax of $6,000 a year, it will show you that about $1,000 of that is going to education. $700 of that is going to public safety. So very interesting tool and a great way for people to find out where the money is actually going. Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to highlight that as we move into budget season as a tool for people to find information.
Well, I certainly appreciate you sharing that. I think those are useful tools. I've played with it a little bit, and you know, you can quickly find yourself out of balance on the budget. I do hope that members of the community will take advantage of the tool just to kind of get a sense of how the city operates and how we, you know, have to keep the budget balanced. You know, it's very easy to say, oh, just cut expenses, but this allows you the opportunity to go through and decide for yourself where you want to cut. So anyways, look forward to getting some feedback from folks on that. So now moving on to item C, monthly financial statement. Ms. Dameron.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start with the COVID update because that gives a good overview of what's happening in the general fund and how that's performing. Let me share my screen here. Give a minute for the ribbons to appear. And as you can see, our real estate tax is performing well. We are ahead of the projection by about $585,000. I would anticipate by the end of the year, we will be close to the budget we would have had before we redid the budget for COVID. And in fact, compared to February of 2020, we are about 2.6% ahead of collections compared to the prior year. Our personal property tax is also performing ahead of the projection by $1.3 million. And again, compared to February of 2020, we're about 5.6% ahead of collections. Lodging continues to trail the projection by $587,000. And looking to where we were last year this time, that's a $1.3 million decrease or a 61% decrease. Meals is continuing to perform better than the projection by $116,000. And again, compared to the previous year, our collections are 1.5 million less, and that's about a 32.5% decrease. Our business, professional, and occupational license are performing ahead of the projection also. Again, compared to February of 2020, we're about $370,000 less, or about 34%. However, business license are not due until March 1st, and so we'll continue to see additional revenue come in and have a better comparison at next month's financial update. Sales tax for education continues to perform above the projection by $430,000. That's $68,000 more than where we had collected last year this time. I'm showing the CARES a little different this month. In the past, I pulled out the CARES for education that we sent to the schools. And now that we're further along in our CARES spending, what I have done is included revenue to the extent that there's an offsetting expenditure in the general fund. And so that number is about $2.1 million. And then our other revenue streams, which include things like charges for services, permitting, fines, EMS recovery, is performing better than the projection by about $143,000. Our expenditures are ahead of the projection by about $186,000, and that's primarily timing differences. We're still within our budget expectations. And so at the end of the day, what this chart is showing us is that we have a budget that anticipated a $7 million deficit. At the end of February, our actual deficit would be about $4.1 4 million. And we're performing about 4 million ahead of where we projected to be at this point in time. And that projection would have been about an $8.5 million deficit. And you may ask, well, why would that be when our budget had a 7 million? And that's simply because our revenue streams and expenditure streams don't flow evenly. And about this time of year in February, when we still have BPOL to collect and we still have another half of real estate, we use some of our reserves to cover that period. And so that our reserves fluctuate throughout the year. I also wanted to note that if I take our actual revenues at this point in time and pull out those things that we didn't budget for and aren't normal revenue streams like the CARES Act, and also we were fortunate enough to get another grant from the Williamsburg Health Foundation to the tune of $270,000. If I pull those out and then compare revenues to where we were in February of 2020, I would find that our revenues now have decreased $3.2 million, or about 14%. So I thought that kind of showed the COVID impact very clearly. I'd also like to point out that our sales tax and our capital improvement fund is about $577,000 less than last year this time, and that's about a 20.5% decrease. And in the tourism fund, the sales tax revenue is about $330,000 less than last February. That's about a 25% decrease. And the $2 lodging tax, it has decreased compared to last year about $318,000, or 51%. In our utility fund, we continue to see the impact of reduced consumption both in water and sewer. However, our expenditures are operating in line with budget. And finally, I'd like to note that your report also includes an update from the Commissioner of Revenue's office on the sales tax that compares the brick and mortar sales tax received to internet sales. And that concludes my report. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Dameron? Yes, Mr. Maslin.
One question on the real estate line. Can you remind us, when we put that budget together for real estate taxes, did that include an estimate in terms of how the assessed portfolio throughout the city would increase? And if so, how do we know year to date that compared to the estimate?
Well, you're talking about the overall assessments in the city?
Right.
Right. So we had an assumption, or when we put this budget together, we assumed, I think, about a 3% increase in real estate assessments, and that was maintained. However, not knowing how COVID would impact the community and the ability for people to be able to pay that debt, I think we reduced it about 10%. And thankfully, our collections are coming in strong. And I don't think we're going to see that 10% reduction that we anticipated.
Did we see the 3% increase?
Yes, we did. Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Director Dameron, I have a quick question. Thank you, as always, for your fiscal analysis. I know I say that every month, but I mean it every month. It's nice being able to rely on you making sure that the city is in the best position that we can be, considering the circumstances. Are there any projections of the potential funding that we may receive with a second, or what for Williamsburg would be a third round of CARES Act funding?
There has been some talk that there may be some funding coming in, I think, for Williamsburg, that there were some estimates going around that I think were around maybe $3 million. I've heard a lot of things about what's happened with the bill lately, but not in regards to what may be included for local government.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor, I saw your hand up.
Councilman Rogers just asked the question that I was going to ask about any locality funding in the most recent stimulus package.
Great minds think alike.
I can add to that a little bit. You know, we have a consultant in DC that helps us monitor what's happening with CARES, and their report does show what Ms. Dameron said. Somewhere between $2.8 and $3.2 million is expected. What's not known is exactly how that money will be handled when it's handed down. Will it go through the state as it did last time, and what kind of restrictions the state might place on it, or how they might disperse it? So it's still fairly uncertain at this moment, but it does look like there will be some relief coming. You know, last time there were pretty strong restrictions on revenue replacement, which made it difficult for us to solve the budget deficit that we're showing here with that money. It's our hope that this time that won't be the case, because certainly the federal government and the state government heard it from every locality in the state that that was not a good use of the funding. So hopefully this time we'll be able to use it to fill this budget deficit.
Okay. There's no other questions. We'll move on to unfinished business, which is the consideration and direction to staff regarding the Neighborhood Balance Committee recommendations and implementations.
Thank you, Mayor Pons and council members. As you know, the Neighborhood Balance Committee was created to evaluate the balance of rental and owner-occupied homes in Williamsburg neighborhoods and to identify strategies to improve the balance. The committee included 20 members representing landlords, students, William and Mary homeowners, and city staff, which met over 15 months and resulted in 27 concepts that could impact housing in the city. At the end of the process, each member ranked the concepts based on preference in long-term and short-term lists. Rankings were presented to City Council at your December work session. At that meeting, City Council directed staff to make recommendations on the implementation. What you have before you today are short-term actionable items. During the short term, the NBC items ranked high in the voting process, requiring partnership with William and Mary will be evaluated by the Joint Administrators Group during their monthly meetings. Items of mutual interest will be pursued further in the second implementation phase, 3 to 5 years from now. This strategy will allow the implementation items to be completed and the impacts of those strategies to be understood. The concepts recommended before you today are based on limited staffing in the needed departments for this implementation. The implementation plan attempts to maximize impact and available staff time. So what you have before you is the short-term voting outcomes. First up would be the 4-person allowance, and we're looking at implementing that in 2021. As the Neighborhood Balance Committee progressed, limiting the 4-person allowance was pervasive throughout the neighborhood representatives who argued for abolishing the allowance. Other neighborhood representatives sought to institute a moratorium on new 4-person permits until more is certain regarding the housing market. Staff supports the concept of a moratorium for 3 years for the new 4-person permits, which would require revising the existing zoning ordinance to add a section stating the ordinance shall not be enforced for 3 years. This allows the city to monitor the impacts of new residential product, investigate other housing solutions, and consider options to address affordability following the Affordable Housing Work Group process. Staff estimates that it will require 3 months to complete the process of drafting the revised ordinance and steering it through the adoption process. And as you can see on this slide, Mr. Trivett has on the screen, as you can see the 4-person approvals that were granted by the city under the current ordinance. And you can see also by the date and by the year. The second one to look at, Mr. Trivett showing you the 4-person rentals. As you can see them, they're the dark brown and black color on the maps. There are 15 on the Richmond Road neighborhood, and there are 21 on the Jamestown Road side of town. The next item to look at would be the trash card ordinance with an implementation of year of 2021. This concept would require staff to revise the city code to prohibit trash carts in a front yard, possibly requiring they be stored in side or rear yards with appropriate screening, establishing a time frame for the carts to be removed from the street, and prescribing a penalty for a violation. We looked at this ordinance several years back, so I guess we'll have to go back and pull that back out, and then we'll research some similar regulations in other localities to form a new basis for the draft. And that ordinance would be required to be presented to City Council for adoption. So you would see that again also. The third item was restructuring the Neighborhood Relations Committee, and we're looking at possibly doing that in 2022. Staff recommends restructuring the committee to function as a technical advisory committee. A technical advisory committee was presented at the neighborhood balance meetings, and that would be to address community concerns. Staff was looking at the committee to consist of city staff who will receive, investigate, and make recommendations to the city manager on community concerns that can be provided to William and Mary administration at their regular monthly meetings, depending on the urgency of the TAC issue. Staff's proposing that the makeup consists of the police, fire, planning, and co-compliance representatives and additional members depending on complaints and problems received. This group would investigate complaints and design a system for reviewing, redesigning, and reporting issues on an updated web page. So what we're looking at here is trying to look at a web page system, and that we could have individuals who could report not only on the web page, but also see updates on the web page. The committee will report to City Council annually on the needs and successes addressing town gown issues. And I think we could see the town gown report being a part of the TAC committee's responsibilities. The next one on the list was implement a certified rent ready program, and that's similar to what Norfolk was doing. Staff will develop and implement a rent ready program for the 2023-24 academic year. The program would be a voluntary certificate of rental housing and landlords using quality assessment, landlord completion of a training course, and use of a city preferred lease, and enrollment in emergency notification system as some of the criteria. A website would be dedicated to the Rent Ready program effort and serve as a clearinghouse for program users, administrators, and interested parties. William and Mary's participation in the program will be essential to promote only those properties enrolled to its students and parents to give certification. Over the next few months, staff will develop the policy documents and curriculum with Norfolk's Rent Ready as an example, and we will present back to City Council for comment and direction. The last one is adopt a cop academy. This is for the police department to formalize a program with a curriculum in partnership with William and Mary to increase safety and provide a strong connection to the community for off-campus use and Greek life. Modeled similar to Blacksburg, the program will structure the program around positive interactions in the community, and a program brief will be shared with the council prior to initiation, and council action is not needed to approve or launch the program. You also had in your packet the long-term voting options. We're looking at the long-term initiatives will be addressed later in the year after the Affordable Housing Work Group meets and reports its findings to City Council. Staff will provide concepts identified in the NBC report to this work group for inclusion in their discussions, to include a housing need analysis, community land trust, preservation assistant program, direct loan program, inclusionary zoning, hotel to affordable housing conversion. So all of these items have actually been presented to the affordable work group, who has had their first committee meeting. And once that work group comes up with recommendations, then we'll propose those on to council for discussion later on, we hope this year. Also in your packet, staff included correspondence from the NBC members. I think you've got several forms from them talking about what they see as important to the item in front of you today. So other than that, if you have any questions for me, or I'm sure Mr. Trivett will be happy to answer any questions either. This is what staff's proposing right now for the short-term items for Neighborhood Balance Committee.
Well, Ms. Murphy, thank you for that presentation. But moreover, thank you all that participated on the Neighborhood Balance Committee for these, 15 to 18 months. I know that there was a lot of work done. A lot of presenters came before you all with recommendations, sharing their what happens in other jurisdictions. And there was quite a lot of deliberation that went on. And I know that the members of the community that participated on it certainly welcomed this opportunity. And so that said, I'll kick it over to Vice Mayor Dent if he had any questions or thoughts.
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Mayor, and Ms. Murphy. Just echo the mayor's comments, and thank you and staff for putting together these short-term recommendations, but also to everyone that participated on the Neighborhood Balance Committee for their time and energy put into this to try to work for towards neighborhood balance. Also, just want to say, thanks to everyone who's contacted members of council, sharing their thoughts and concerns. And that's what the process is all about. We want to hear from you. We need to hear from you. So everyone that's reached out, we really appreciate all the input that you provided. On the full person moratorium, I've read all the recommendations from Neighborhood Balance and staff's recommendation, and I think it is the right time to take a pause, and for all the reasons that Ms. Murphy outlined in her presentation, with the additional residential units work that the affordable housing work group will do. I think all of that'll give us time to assess what kind of impact that might have. So, and also looking at her numbers in the presentation, there's only 7 properties in the last 2 years that were awarded the 4-person. So it doesn't seem like it's going to be a huge impact on those properties over this 3-year period. So, Ms. Murphy, I did have a couple questions on the trash ordinance. I know since this topic came up, I've ridden around the day after and a couple days after the trash day in particular neighborhoods, and I'm not saying it's not a problem. I just haven't witnessed where it was that big of a problem. Do you receive a lot of complaints?
We get a lot of complaints, especially the downtown neighborhoods, with the cans being left at the street. It hasn't been as bad this year, I think, as it has been in the past because of the situation, with the students on campus, and with we're not seeing it as much this year. But in the past, we've had a lot of complaints, especially close to campus with the downtown neighborhoods, and the trash, the cans not being pulled back, the cans overflowing, and the trash is in the street. Those types of issues.
And just a couple concerns from my perspective is I think, and we don't know, the ordinance hasn't been presented, but that there may be some unintended consequences for folks that may be elderly or may be physically challenged who can't get out, and maybe that particular week they couldn't do it because of their physical capabilities. So that kind of concerns me. And also, one side of me feels like we're getting into a point of kind of over-regulating when we're talking about rolling trash cans back and trash cans overflowing. And is there some other way that we could address that? And then I'm also concerned about who's responsible for the ordinance once it's in place. Are we putting an additional burden on an already small staff? So that's just my comments on the trash ordinance. On the Rent Ready program, in the documents provided before the meeting, prior to the meeting, you talked about Norfolk's Rent Ready program. Is there any particular methods they use to encourage participation? Because it doesn't seem like that people would be jumping to voluntarily participate in this type of program.
I think they used a lot of the federal government was a big push for them. So I think this is going to be important that we work with our partners at William and Mary and work with our landlords to see if we can really bring the landlords together to use the lease, because that's one of the things we hear a lot about is the lease requirements aren't the same throughout the city through the different properties. And maybe we can educate our renters by having stronger leases and giving a little more of what's required for renting and staying at an individual home, and maybe that would help it. I think there are parents too who are looking, they don't know the city when they're looking for places for individuals to stay, and I think it's an extra comfort level for them to know that the city has a program, possibly that the city does additional inspections and those kinds of things that, you know, that would make them more comfortable also. So it's something to look at and try and see if it works. If it doesn't work, we'll try something differently, I think.
Yeah, and I can elaborate a little bit on that, Vice Mayor. What Norfolk told us when they came and presented to us is that their partnership with the Navy is particularly strong. And so what they have managed to do is essentially the Navy requires that if you're living off base in Norfolk, you've got to live in a rent-ready certified home. So what that does is, even though it's a voluntary program, it provides incentive for landowners or landlords to enroll in the program so that they have the broadest audience possible. I think that would be our approach with William & Mary, is to try and achieve a similar relationship, so that they are at the strongest possible way encouraging their students who choose to live off campus to pick homes that are enrolled in the Rent Ready program.
So you touched on my next question, is have there been any initial conversations with William & Mary that they would be interested in this type of program?
Yeah, I mean, when we put together the Neighborhood Balance Committee, we wanted to be sure that we had William & Mary represented both at the student level and at the administration level, so that the outcomes could have representatives and spokespeople in those sectors. And so the administration of William & Mary seems very keen on this idea. I really don't see any kind of a drawback. I think what this program offers to landlords is security in actions that can be taken when their leases are violated. And then secondly, for the students, it offers the comfort of safety. It gives them a much stronger position to call the city and say there's a problem in their home, and gives the city better leverage to require that to be addressed. And for the university itself, I think for the administration, it gives them greater comfort that the students that they have living off campus are doing so in a safe manner. And then for the residents that live next to the properties, I think it gives them the comfort that there is this leverage the city has to enforce good neighbor relations.
One last question on the Rent Ready program is when it mentions the use of a city's preferred lease, is there possibly any liability for the city?
Well, we have to be careful about how we draft that and what we're suggesting to them, but we'll look at that pretty carefully and make sure it complies with all the state laws regarding occupancy.
Thanks. And Mr. Trivett, probably I get this would be for you, as I'm assuming, I'm not sure, at least looking through it, that it would be large costs, but there's obviously going to be some cost involved with some of these recommendations, and especially the ones that'll take effect in 2021. Did you account for that in the budget proposal?
We've not added any costs for 2021. I think those initial programs that we're putting together won't have an immense cost. I think there is a cost associated with the Rent Ready program, but that's a few years out. We've got a lot of work to do to put together the policy documents for that, but more importantly, build the curriculum for the landlords. I think that's one of the most important parts of the success in Norfolk is that educational curriculum for landlords. In terms of the 4-person pause, I think all that does is reduce revenue a little bit. As you said, it's not a high demand permit anyway. So I don't anticipate that to be really a known issue with the budget. The trash cart ordinance is an interesting question though, because there will be a cost to that associated with staff time, but we're not proposing to add staff to do that enforcement. We've already got inspectors out in the field that do zoning enforcement, and this will be one more thing for them to look for. It'll largely be complaint based, but certainly as that inspector is driving through neighborhoods, if she sees a violation, she will cite them. I think we balance that though with the penalty. And we've been pretty clear that in order for the trash cart ordinance to be successful, there has to be a penalty of some type. So I think that what we would aim to do is in year 2 and year 3 of the trash cart ordinance, make sure that that penalty is sufficient enough to pay for the staff time required to enforce it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for answering all my questions. And Mayor, overall for me, I support the staff's recommendations. There's still some details to work out going forward, but overall, I support staff's recommendations.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. We'll go to Mr. Maslin.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. On the housing, I wanted to just revisit the good news. So I reached out to Midtown Row and William and Mary to get updates on the relief their apartments and revised dorm policy may provide to our neighbors. Midtown Row has, as of now, has 250 student signed leases and is looking for 250 more. They've leased all of their 3-bedroom apartments, most of their 1- and 2-bedroom units. As we know, William and Mary changed their policy and requires both freshman and sophomore classes to live on campus. They're now housing about 1,500 students per academic year. So with these 2 relief measures, the pressure for other housing is being reduced by 1,000 to 1,250 students next year. Looking at the statistics in terms of the number of 4-person approvals, it looks, so last year there was 1, we talked about 2019, 6. Looking at the last 5 years, the average is about 3.6 per year. Carolyn, can you explain what's the different requirements? What are the different requirements for a 4-person certification versus having a say 3-person rental?
A 4-person, basically, you have to provide us your leases every year. You have to meet the criteria in the zoning ordinance for to have the 4th person. It's a square footage size for the house. You have to have 4 parking spaces. They can be either on site or directly in front of the unit. It requires the zoning administrator to make an inspection every year. So with the zoning administrator, usually the month of August and September, she goes out and visits all of these sites that you see on this list. In most instances, we meet the individuals at the site. We stress what the importance is of being a good neighbor, from picking up trash for parties. It also provides us an opportunity to have direct contact with the property owner. In instances where there's been a complaint on a property, usually we can come straight back to the office and either call them or email them, and that is usually taken care of pretty fast. The tenants, get great information as far as making sure when you leave for any length of time about cutting water and making sure you don't have leaks and picking up your papers and those kinds of things. So it's a lot more restricted than just the 3-person houses. What you don't see on here are some of them have actually, I have revoked one individual permit several years ago, and there are a couple of instances where some of the houses have been converted back to single-family dwellings. So what you see before you on this list are the ones that are currently active.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask, thanks for answering whether there's been more than one revocation. Now, on the rentals that are less than 4-person, how many of those have you revoked?
We don't really revoke them.
Zoning ordinance allows for the rental to 3 people. That's a right that you have as a property owner in the state of Virginia, is to rent your property. So we don't have control over those rentals in any direct way. The 4-person rule is additional conditions in exchange for the additional person in the house.
Thanks. So the unintended consequence of putting a moratorium on 4-person rule would be less regulation going forward. Is that correct? Less regulated units.
It certainly is less opportunity to regulate. Absolutely. I mean, the 4-person rule requiring that special use permit actually gives us more influence over the property, both in terms of the occupant's behavior, but also in terms of the condition of the home. The 3-person allowance being as of right, we don't have any of those controls.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that it's not necessarily a cure-all for everything, and may have some unintended consequences. So moving on to the trash issue, I think it's, and we had an email come in recently, I think it's important to separate our discussion about trash carts from trash screening. Because what's been pointed out is that a lot of our houses really don't have the opportunity to have screening that's actually going to look good. I think we can end up with screening that's going to be more of a eyesore than we think. So I'd like to discuss those separately. In terms of the trash carts, thanks for the info that you gave the vice mayor when he was questioning. One of my questions was, we're, as a city, 322 years old. We've gotten this far without a trash cart ordinance. What's changed? I remember 40 years, so to go back 40 years, I was renting a unit as a student. That's back when the city would actually come to your backyard, empty your trash cans into their wheeled trash cart and actually take it to the street. So it wasn't an issue back then. The city was doing all that service. And as I'm concerned about, Carolyn, what were you thinking about in terms of what the hours would be in terms of the deadline to get the carts removed, and also what the fine would be?
We haven't really investigated that far. If this is a program that council would like staff to investigate further, then we would go and get that information and come back with an ordinance that would prescribe certain time limits and those kinds of things. I can't remember years ago what the time limit was on that. It was at the end of the day or something like that, like 9 o'clock at night or something. But we would look at the regulations and come back for council with specifics as far as timeframes and if screening's necessary and those types of things.
And any ordinance being considered would require a public hearing. Is that correct?
It requires council approval.
No public hearing.
It's not a zoning. It would not be a zoning issue. It would simply be a city code change that would not require going to the planning commission or public hearing.
Okay. So I too am concerned about what the vice mayor talked about in terms of some of our elderly residents who may have help getting the bin out, the night before, the morning of, but then, need flexibility in terms of catching it at the end of the day. And also we know that, the schedules for the pickup vary depending on what neighborhood you're in. I'm fortunate in our neighborhood that, the neighbors look out for each other and, we'll take the bins up if somebody's, say, at work or can't get it up. So that's one of my considerations there. The Certified Rent Ready program, I think it sounds like a great idea. I'm a little concerned that I haven't heard from anybody that, as a landlord, who's actually interested in doing this. And Carolyn, do you have any of our landlords that actually said they want to do this?
No, I think that will be part of this. That's why that was put off until 2023, is to get some landlord participation and see what we can develop and see if we can get the landlords to buy into this, because I think that's an important part of the Rent Ready program is getting the landlords to think that this is a good idea, and certifying as many as we can. So
yeah,
we
definitely.
We did have some landlords on the Neighborhood Balance Committee that thought this was a good idea. Now, whether or not landlords as a whole will think it's a good program probably depends upon what the requirements end up being.
Yeah, and I think that the Norfolk program is a good program. One of my concerns, though, is, and I think it's great if William and Mary can convince students to look to those rentals first, but we know the reality of that may not happen. For example, if we know that William and Mary as an institution is not doing anything to promote Midtown Row. So that would have been a first step, is at least promote it to the whole university. That would be an easy thing. I'm not sure whether William and Mary can or would want to require it of students. So we'd have to see on that. The other thing in terms of staff time, in the construction industry, we have a term called delegated design. My suggestion is, if we wanted to look at this in the future, to reach out to the local Realtors Association and see if they can actually start putting the program together, rather than us spending staff time when our staff is fairly limited. So that's all I had in my comments and questions. Barb?
Thank you. And having been on the Neighborhood Balance Committee, I can attest to all of the work and effort that Drew and Carolyn and other staff members put together, not only in developing the recommendations, but particularly in the agenda that was presented to us and the various speakers that were brought in from other cities. I found it very helpful, and I particularly like the way that we've sort of divided it into short-term and long-term recommendations, because the long-term recommendations, I think, will really have a far-reaching effect, but will take some time. And having been on the NBC, as I call it, and now shifted to the Affordable Housing Committee, I think that it will give us a chance to look at it sort of holistically as to say, especially how those long-term recommendations will impact housing in a lot of different areas. And I'm going to sort of skip around here a little bit, because having been on the Neighborhood Relations Committee, I can see a lot of the things that we talked about there being rolled into some of these short-term recommendations. I'm fully in agreement that it's time to shift to attack. We're getting like the military with all of our acronyms here, but I think that makes sense moving forward. And as to say, some of the things that we talked about and enacted when I was on the Neighborhood Relations Committee are being considered with the Rent Ready program. I think that Carolyn and I worked on a website so that renters would have information on their landlords. And so I think this is a good process. I do recognize the limited amount of staff staff personnel and their time. So we'll be patient as we work towards that in year 23, 24. As far as the trash cart ordinance, one of the things that I did as a landlord who happens to live down the street from my rental property is include a trash cart fee in my lease. And we have seen from other landlords the effectiveness of attaching penalties to behavior issues in the leases. And it was interesting, the first year, the penalty wasn't quite high enough to enact positive change. So the second year I increased it. And after one issue, I didn't have any more the rest of the year. I do agree with the comments that were brought forward in the email about concerns with screening. My next door neighbor, as a matter of fact, does not have any screening capability in the front of the house. And for them to try and take their carts to the back of the house would pretty much require them walking through the ravine. So I do think we need to take a look at that. And the question also came up in that individual's email as to whether this would be for the entire city or just certain areas. Because I would guess that the majority of complaints that Carolyn and her staff receive are for neighborhoods close to campus. But if we're looking at an ordinance, I assume, Drew, that this would be for the entire city.
Yes, it would. It would apply citywide. I think we talked about a little bit of NBC. The trash cart issue is not a singular issue to rental properties. Even in my neighborhood, there are plenty of carts that get left out longer than they should. Mine sometimes does. I'm one of those fortunate guys like Mr. Mazin lives in a neighborhood where my neighbor, he often drags it back to the house for me. And I'm so grateful that very often I take him a little piece of cake or something to reward him. So, maybe that's the answer to our trash cart issues. Everybody needs to bake a cake on Sunday. But yes, the ordinance would apply citywide.
Or in that effect, just to be a little more neighborly and help your neighbor out. And as far as time, I put into my lease that if the carts weren't back off the street within, we get picked up on Tuesday, typically in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, but they had to be back by Thursday morning. So gave them a little bit more than 24 hours. So I do think that we really need to be careful about how this is expressed and take into account not only the staff time, but the staff cost to take care of this. And so rent ready, long-term, short-term. Again, I applaud the staff for all of their work on the recommendations and look forward to the next step. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Begin by echoing all the thanks that has been given to staff and members of the NBC for spending those raucous 15 months in which you were first meeting in person, and then COVID hit and there was some time in between, and then you had to handle the virtual meetings that we've all gotten so used to. So very much appreciate the ability to now consider what I think at one point was a total of over 25 ideas. And I agree with Councilwoman Ramsey and how nice it is to be able to look at those in the short term and the long term. I want to take them out of order a little bit as well. And I'll start with the trash cart ordinance. Initially, when I was a student at William & Mary, I similarly had some difficulties remembering to take the trash cart back. I'm now in the unique position of every Sunday night taking at least 6 trash cans to the road, which is harder to forget because it is so many, but I recognize that it can be difficult for some people to remember. My concern would be with those that might be mobilely impaired, what unintended consequences are we making for needing them to get back their cart within a certain period? And then with the recommendation to have it in a screened in area, does that leave some people wondering if they then need to construct that screened in area if they do not have one readily available? So I think while that is intended well, putting an ordinance in may not be the right method to do it. Another tool that may work though, to still allow the intended consequences, would be, as we flush out the idea of the certified rent ready program, including aspects about a timely manner of retrieving the trash cart from the road into those actual leases, per, again, Councilwoman Ramsey's forethought in including that in hers, could very well make sure that the trash cans are coming back and that certain folks are able to remember to take them back. So in mentioning the Rent Ready program, that's also one that I think is a fantastic idea. It will need the absolute partnership with William and Mary on that. And I understand and I'm appreciative that they have let us know that they are in favor of it. But it sounds like something to me that would show that would be helpful to tenants that are living in rent-ready houses, and would also be helpful to the outlying neighborhoods as rent-ready homes are connected with renters, and we're making sure that they are adhering to certain guidelines that the city recommends. Personally, in my junior and senior year, would have lived in a home with an absentee landlord I never once met. It would not have been a rent-ready home, and I wish I had had the opportunity to find some kind of directory of homes that would qualify, and certainly would have been nice to have a greater collaboration with the city as a renter. On the adopt a cop idea, I know Chief Dunn and our department to be embracing that community meeting idea, that ideal. And so I think that's a fantastic idea. However, we can encourage the collaboration amongst the police department and groups around the city is a wonderful thing to do. And I know that Chief Dunn will work hard, just as he has with the neighborhood resource officers and now with his police citizen advisory board, to make sure that they are, having the relationships that they need to with groups to be as productive as they can. Finally, on the 4-person moratorium recommendation from staff, I want to echo Vice Mayor Dent in thanking everyone who emailed and called. I have more so than the last couple of months been getting some reach outs, which I really appreciate. It's nice to see that folks are so heavily engaged in what we're doing. I want to speak towards how I see the issue for a second per some of the questions from Councilman Maslin, and coming from the position of someone who was just a renter in the historic neighborhoods only a couple of years ago. But I want to begin, and I won't take too long in doing so, by saying that my goals are the same as everyone who has been recommending to us and calling in or emailing in or maybe listening right now, of making sure that Williamsburg is a great place to live in. It's a great place to own a home in. I remember when I was on the Planning Commission, folks talked a lot about, we need to make sure that our neighborhoods are attractive to the firefighter teacher couple that is interested in establishing a home and beginning to raise their family here, which I'm fully in favor of. I believe, though, that the solvents to get there will be the long-term ones that council is to consider soon, and that whatever council does in the short term, including the 4-person moratorium, does not necessarily address this long-term balance. So on the 4-person moratorium specifically, I've been taken a bit by surprise. My understanding had been that the residency of the city appreciated the 4-person rule because of its stated purpose. And I've now learned that that's not necessarily the case. There have been certainly plenty of people who are advocating for its removal, but it's confused me as to why. And I'd like to explain briefly. I hope those that are advocating for the moratorium will give me a moment to. And while the conversation has been around this moratorium, with some advocating for a full repeal, I believe that neither would change the nature of the neighborhoods. And though there's been some pressure to support it, I don't necessarily think it's a truthful thing to do, to support something you don't believe in, knowing that it won't have the intended impact as stated. So with so much, what's the right word, ire maybe around the 4-person rule, I try to go back. I try to consider what was its original intent before even my time here in Williamsburg. So I think it's important to remember that in 2009, I'm pretty sure it was, the 4-person allowance was put in as a tool for the city to have that greater oversight into houses with a higher occupancy. And Director Murphy, you also mentioned earlier that with renters under the 4-person rule allowance, there is a greater coordination with city services too. So I believe it helps renters in that way. Interestingly, I read in preparation for this meeting old articles about it, and in 2012 it was reconsidered, the 4-person allowance, And the program had actually been going so well that the discussion was had to possibly lower the square footage applicant requirement for someone interested in having a 4-person allowable home, because the city had found that it gave them that greater oversight and it gave those renters a better connection with some of the city services. A couple of the arguments that I've heard, the points that I've heard on the side of repealing or putting a moratorium around the 4-person rule are as stated. The first one was that it would raise prices in the neighborhoods. But as I bring a couple of these up, I want to address them because I find it's good to go back to some of the points that the Neighborhood Balance Committee addressed, even though some of those meetings were not necessarily open to the public. On the prices, it's not so. Prices did not increase abnormally after the rule was implemented, and that data was discussed and shown in the Neighborhood Balance Committee meeting and is still open to the public. I also had a member of the group that was advocating for the moratorium of this rule reach out to me and say, we need to have a conversation with a local realtor to show that in a home that may be able to rent to 4 people, it abnormally hurts some of the prices in the surrounding area. So we ended up meeting with that realtor and learned that prices of homes are entirely geared towards the comparable prices of homes around them, not the potential income that they could be garnering as a rental. The second point that I've heard is that it makes the neighborhoods noisier than usual, and having some homes in which 4 people are allowed, some home in which it's just 3 people. But I believe the stat is that 2 noise complaints in the last 10 years have occurred, which isn't necessarily an increase in what we've seen from some of the normally rented homes in the rest of the area. So the one point that I think has some merit is maybe waiting to see with the end result of some of the housing that I'm on Richmond Road, so down the street from me in Midtown Row is coming in. What shift will that have in the housing market of Williamsburg? And maybe I think that's a fair enough point. There's a fire truck going by. I hope that's not too loud. But what we just heard was that in the last year, I think it was 1 home had applied that had been accepted to be a 4-person allowable home. So if we go 3 years of a moratorium, and with that moratorium stop then 3 houses from applying, then I don't think that is as much of a shift. And I don't think the pause would really change much in the actual neighborhoods. I think what the pause really does, and this is my final point before I get off my soapbox, is take us down a slippery slope. If we 3 years from now complete our pause, really the options we have are to reinstate the 4-person allowance, in which case we haven't really done anything but just gone back to reinstate a rule that's in place now, or we look at the potential for disbanding the 4-person allowance, forgetting that the original intent of that was to have greater oversight into the area and to assist renters more in connecting them with city services. Then we need to manage the slippery slope of, well, if we disband, if those, I think it was 37 homes that are currently operating in the 4-person allowance, if they're not grandfathered in, what does that do to the 37 people that are currently renting in those homes? Do they then need to find 3-person homes to rent from? Do we then take 13 homes that could be owner occupied off of that market and into the rental market because we're just placing so many people with the current 4-person allowance? So to close, I would wrap up and ask the public proponents of this and my council colleagues as well, do we want to give up the tool that works to maintain the sanctity of the neighborhoods? Because that's what I think we're doing. And if so, I think that works against the goals that we all have, as I stated at the start. Those are my points. I appreciate the ability to give them. And of course, the time that it took staff and the members of the NBC to give some of these recommendations to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. Well, yeah, and you made a lot of good points, as all the members of council has. I certainly do appreciate hearing them, and certainly some of the data that Mr. Maslin was able to convey, I think is helpful for the overall discussion. You know, as I think back to the many years we've been having this conversation about student housing in the neighborhoods, you know, I'm always reminded that what we're trying to do is to protect these neighborhoods, to make them, to allow them to continue to be what they are, great places to live in close proximity to the college, and you know, and provide housing for families and retirees and students. And keeping in mind that students have been in our neighborhoods, you know, for hundreds of years. you know, the house that I live in, I tell the story, it was built by a person who built it as, it has 3 suites in it, and she had students living there. And the house I grew up in, the Barksdale house, was a duplex. It had students who lived above Martha Barksdale. And so I think this conversation is not about pushing students out. It's about trying to maintain the appropriate balance of rental properties. Because what has changed is, in these years, is the way that students live in our neighborhoods. They are living in houses independent of owner occupancy. And that in itself has changed the dynamic that I think has gotten us to this conversation. And going back to the one of the impetuses for creating the 4-person rule was those things that you mentioned, Mr. Rogers. I think, but in addition, we wanted to eliminate the onerous impact of not allowing 4 people in a house on those student renters, because a lot of these houses were large houses, and there were 4 people living in those houses. And so we wanted to find a way that they could live legally. And I think through the compromise in the discussion at the time, we created the ordinance. And you're right, these are not the problem houses in terms of noise violations, rowdiness, those types of things. But what they do is create some impact in terms of how many cars are going into neighborhoods. You know, what is the pedestrian foot traffic in and out? You know, and if you have a house with 4 people living in it, presumably you have 4 cars out front, and then you get visitors. And so all of those types of things also impact the quality of life for the traditional resident. But I think throwing that ordinance out just for sake of the conversation today is not a good thing long term. And I would certainly not, you know, as we move forward, would not want to take away the from those owners that have the 4-person allowance, take that away, because your point is taken. If we move back to 3 in those homes, that displaces 38 folks, and then are we impacting the ability for other people to buy those houses because they turn into rentals? One of the questions I did have for Mr. Trivett or Ms. Murphy in terms of valuation, was there any conversation about if we were to put a moratorium or end the 4-person rule, would that create greater value in those that have already applied and received the 4-person ruling? So now if it's capped at 38, it seems to me that the value of those homes becomes a little higher. And then it's less likely that they're going to come back into the traditional home ownership market. Was there any conversation along those lines?
We did have Derek Green, the city's assessor, participate in the Neighborhood Balance Committee a couple times to talk about this issue. And I'm the first to admit that what Derek does very often is way above my head, which is why we have Derek. But what he did do a good job of illustrating, and I think it was surprising to a lot of members of the Neighborhood Balance Committee, is that the occupancy really is not driving the value at this moment. Now, we didn't ask the specific question about if you didn't have the 4-person allowance, or if you made a change to that, how would it impact it? We can go back and ask him that. I think it will largely be speculation on his part, but I think even he maybe was surprised that based on assessment to sales ratios, we were not seeing a big difference between a single family owner occupied home value versus a house that has been converted to rental.
Well, so I'm sure Derek would come back with some answers that even I couldn't understand, which doesn't take much. But as a student of commerce, I know when things are limited in supply, prices go up. And so I'm worried about the unintended consequence of the potential of eliminating this program altogether. And I know we're talking about a moratorium today. And I think it also it puts greater demand on other single family residents if we limit this opportunity. So I think that's a concern of mine. And so That said, I want to get back to the conversation about the balance. And I think that is really what the focus is. It's not about students living in our neighborhoods. We welcome them. They're valuable participants to our community. And this is not about trying to run them out of our neighborhoods, because it's just not that case. But we do need to make sure that we find ways. And I think we talked about it. Ms. Murphy identified them. Investigate other home ownership solutions, address affordability. Those conversations will be going on. We talked about a land trust to help, put some money together to help, first-time home buyers or traditional home buyers in some of these neighborhoods. All of those things are things that we have to work to investigate. I will also say that a lot of this, the onus of this falls not just on the government, the city of Williamsburg, but it falls on some of the other neighborhood residents. Guys, if you have the opportunity to buy a house and put a home ownership requirement in the deed, we'll do that, and then sell it to somebody that's going to be that homeowner. It's going to take some self-help to stem the tide. We cannot create enough ordinances to bring more people, more traditional residents into our neighborhoods. I don't believe that. And so that takes me to trash carts. I'm concerned, as Vice Mayor Dent pointed out, that we may be getting a little heavy-handed. Is there a way for us to motivate neighbors to help neighbors to pull trash cans up? That to me is the best solution. And Andrew, if you're cooking cake on Sunday, I'd like a slice. But I help my neighbors often. I'm driving down the street, there's a student rental on my street, and if I see the trash can there for a day and a half, I'll stop on my way by and pull it up, to the front of the house. That's being neighborly. That's how we get to know one another. And that's how we make our city better. And that's how we, create balance, I believe. So I'm not opposed to looking at an ordinance, but I'll just say that I'm going to be guarded about how heavy-handed we are in that. Restructuring the NBC into the committee, I think it's appropriate to do that at this time. I really think that the Rent Ready program has significant merit. Some of my brief conversations with folks at the college, there seems to be a willingness to support this type of program, and I think the students, as Councilman Rogers pointed out, would welcome that opportunity. And I think the good landlords will want to participate in that, because they'll want to be on that list, and they'll do what it takes to be there. And those landlords that don't want to participate may not get the renters that they want, and that may devalue those properties, and they may want to unload them. And then there's the opportunity for people to step in and buy them and make sure that they're occupied by the traditional residents, working then towards the balance that we're striving for. Adopt a Cop, I think, is a great program. More involvement is good, but again, Vice Mayor made a great point. I mean, time is not elastic. It takes people, and we've got budget constraints, and and if we're doing some of the stuff in the neighborhoods that aren't patrolling the streets and protecting people's property and safety, it's going to require additional police officers, and then likely another tax increase to pay for them. So all in all, I'm supportive of the staff's recommendation. I look forward to seeing these ordinances come forward. I'm going to reserve my judgment, my complete judgment on abolishment or moratorium on the 4-person rule. I'm willing to have that conversation as we move forward. I think that we need to be guarded about the unintended consequences, as Councilman Rogers pointed out, and others as they spoke. We got to the 4-person rule through a whole lot of good work, a lot of community input, and there's good effect by having the policy in place that allows for it. And as Ms. Murphy pointed out, the inspections of the homes, the threat of losing it, losing that opportunity to rent to 4 people is costly to the landlords. When I spoke to 3 of them just yesterday, and those that have it don't want to lose it, and they write it in their lease that should the behavior of those students cause the elimination of that opportunity for them, they're going to have to pay that forward somehow. So there is a value to it. Make no mistakes, despite the analysis that Mr. Green shared with us in terms of property value, there's a value to the landlords in terms of income. So they don't want to lose it. So with that, I think you have a consensus from council on all of these items. There's no vote that needs to happen today, but Ms. Ramsey, I see your hand up. Would you?
So I just had a couple questions that were sparked by your comments and from Councilman Rogers. As I understand it, any moratorium on a 4-person rule would not eliminate the ownership of the people who are currently have that. Is that correct?
That's right. The ones that already have a permit would continue to have a permit.
Even if it was repealed, that would be going forward. It would not be eliminating it now. I mean, if once they have it, they have it.
Right.
When
And land,
non-conforming, that's correct.
Right.
in land
If
use, that's a
it was a P-
grandfathered use.
And the 4-person rule, does it transfer with ownership of the property?
I think you have to reapply, but if you meet the criteria the first time, the odds are you meet the criteria even if you transfer the ownership. You've got to look at the different parts in the ordinance, and I'd have to pull it out and let me look.
Because I know that a house a street over from me was a 4-person house, like it was, I don't know, maybe 2011, 2012, and it sold a couple years ago, and it's still a 4-person house. So I didn't know if it was automatic or if the new owners had to purchase it.
You have to reapply for a new certificate.
So if someone who owned a 4-person house during the moratorium, if that was what was decided upon, sold that property, then the new owner would not be able to reapply to keep it as a 4-person.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
So if someone owns a 4-person house now and there's a moratorium put into effect and they sell that house, then the new owner would not be able to apply to have it sort of retained as a 4-person house.
That's correct. And the certificates are not good forever. I need to make a correction. They're good for 4 years. And so it's a decision that City Council would need to make whether or not to allow that to be a continuing use, even if the moratorium were to be continued, whether you wanted to make that a continuing use. The certificates are 4-year certificates. They're not endless certificates. So
Right.
every 4 years, the property owner has to reapply for them.
And that's in conjunction with reapplying and getting your rental inspection, because that's every 4 years also.
It's the same length of time, whether it's in conjunction or not, I'm sure.
And to Mayor Pond's point about, supply and demand, I think one of the key factors that I've noticed in my neighborhood is location. And there was a house recently sold at top of Griffin Avenue, and it is a 3-person house. It will always be a 3-person house. And it sold for $100,000 more than what the assessed value was. And it sold in, I don't know, probably less than 2 weeks. So I think for most investors, location and cash flow are the determining factors for when, they're looking at properties. So I just wanted clarification on a couple of those things. Thank you.
Mr. Maslin?
Coming into this meeting, I got the impression that Drew, rather than us saying to staff, go ahead with everything, wanted to sort of get some direction on where to prioritize time, since we know it's in short supply, I would actually propose that we put a pause on the trash card and screening initiative.
And to jump off of that, Ted, is I guess this isn't something that we are voting on, but just discussing. Sometimes I have a problem with talking and not ever wrapping it up. To wrap it up, my point would have been to not consider the moratorium or repeal on the 4-person rule, and to put a pause on that recommendation as well.
So my recommendation would be to kick it all to staff, let them kind of get in their E-team meetings, kind of, have the discussion about how best to move forward based on the consensus. I understand Mr. Rogers is opposed to the moratorium, but I think we have a consensus to continue that conversation. Trash, I do believe, got the least favorable response, but that may be something easy that Carolyn's already written in her sleep. Who knows? Unless staff thinks otherwise, I would just be willing to turn it over to you all to come back, at the appropriate time with these matters.
Sure. I think we can do that, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. So staff has done their nose counts, know where they need to be, and we'll present, as soon as we can. Okay. Is there any more on this unfinished business? Okay. Hearing no more comments, we'll move to new business. We have the consideration and adoption of resolution number 2104, accepting the FY21 State of Good Repair paving funds from VDOT for the FY21. Mr. Small, welcome.
Howdy, Mr. Mayor. Let me see if I can get my screen here to share. Before you today is our State of Good Repair paving projects. The city applied for these funds last year, and they were supposed to be awarded in June, but due to the pandemic and the issues with the state budget, the CTB waited until October to finally award their State of Good Repair funding. And so we were awarded 3 projects of the ones we had applied for, and they consist of Jamestown Road from Lake Matoka all the way out to Route 199, South Henry Street from Francis to just north of William Way, and then continuing down South Francis from William Way all the way to Route 199. Total funds awarded on all 3 projects is just over $1 million. And what your consideration is to accept those funds today so that we can begin the work for repaving these streets. These are federal funds this year, and so we're expecting once we get through all of our environmental clearances and everything with our federal funds, we hope to be paving these either in the fall or this time next year. And I'll leave it open to any questions that you may have.
Seems pretty straightforward from my perspective. As we go to repave this section, I know in the past we have talked about perhaps redesigning this road or making some changes. Is that part of this? Or this is obviously just accepting the funds, but is that something you'll be working on as we move forward with the project?
I assume you mean Jamestown Road and potentially doing a road diet along that section. And if so, yes, that is something we could consider. It would be restriping it differently than it is currently striped.
Okay. Well, I think, but so as we move along, I think we should be cognizant of that initiative because I do think it's supported in our GIOs. So, okay. Any questions, Mr. Vice Mayor?
No, just thanks for continuing to work to seek those grant funds for the city to get these streets repaved.
Thank you, sir. I did want to add, also, these funds are 100% federal funds, and there is no local match. So every dollar is money from elsewhere.
That's good. Mr. Maslin, anything? Ms. Ramsey?
Yeah, Aaron, thanks. Since we're talking about road conditions and repairs, and that's another hot topic with the Gazette, any updates on the next step for Duke of Gloucester Street? And then I think we had talked about before the Palace Green. Is that on a schedule for replacing that asphalt?
Actually, the rest of the historic streets in and around the restored area are actually on our paving schedule for this spring. We will be receiving bids on those, I believe it's next week, and then I will bring those forth to council next month for award. For Duke of Gloucester Street, I'm going to have to defer to the city manager on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. At this point, we don't have a plan to treat the surface of Duke of Gloucester Street. You started the meeting out with discussing the Virginia Gazette's reporting on traffic accidents, and I think we could have the same discussion regarding that article on the surface treatment for Duke of Gloucester Street. There have been plenty of compliments to the city and to Clinton-Williamsburg for the paving job that was done. I think people really are enjoying the smooth surface. One of the things I thought was particularly misleading about that article is we did not use standard asphalt on that street. We've not used standard asphalt in the city for some time. We use what Aaron lovingly refers to as a brownstone mix. And as the weather and feet and vehicles and other parts of the city wear on that asphalt and the sun beats on it every day, it slowly starts to lose its black tint and become more and more brown. In fact, there are already areas of Duke of Gloucester Street where you can start to see that brownstone shining through. So over the next little bit, we'll see that turn more and more brown and look more and more historic. In conversations with Clinton-Williamsburg, we definitely decided that the surface treatment we had planned, while great in concept, in execution failed our test. Primarily because one of the things that we did not expect is how much people would enjoy a smooth surface. And the surface treatment we had planned would not have been smooth at all. So a lot of the activities that people are doing down there right now would not have been possible. So we want to make sure we get it right and not fast. So we'll take our time, and if another product comes along that makes it so that we can get to that historic look faster, we'll certainly consider it.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. And as a bike rider, I agree. It's great to have that smooth surface, and also appreciate the city staff taking a two-step approach to test different solutions before, trying it on the whole street. Thank you.
I have no questions or comments regarding this topic, state of good repair and the money. So find it very straightforward. Thank you.
Neither do I. Thank you for all your work, Mr. Small.
Thank you, sir.
So I move that City Council approve Resolution 21-04, accepting the funds and authorizing the city manager to execute all necessary documents relative to carrying out the State of Good Repair program.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Pons,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent,
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
So before you go anywhere, Mr. Smalls, next item is award of design to Kimley-Horn and Associates for Kappa Landing Road corridor improvements.
Okay, just give me 1 second. I'm trying to find my screen here. For some reason, it's not showing. It might show up. How are we looking now? Can everybody see the map?
Yes, sir.
Looks good. Thanks, Aaron.
Okay. The second project before you today is actually a project that's somewhat started along. This is Capitol Landing Road, the redesign. As you might recall, we met with members of council and with staff over the last year. We were really kicking this off to start our public information phase on the project right at the outset of the pandemic. And so that kind of made it really hard to kind of organize, and frankly, city staff and city council had other things on their minds. So we're now ready to kind of take some of the improvements forth on this project and start some of the data collection phase while we finish up our putting the project out for public input. What you see on the map there is kind of the limits of the project and how it's and the neighborhoods that are affected by it. It generally runs from the Colonial Parkway in the south up Capitol Landing Road to the intersection with Merrimack Trail. We have included the Brandywine neighborhood in there because they are really almost right at the intersection. What Kimley-Horn is the engineer. They were selected in a process through normal procurement last year. It actually took quite a lengthy time to get the contracts approved through VDOT's federal contract approval process. And then we got started right at the beginning of 2020 when we were hit with the delays due to COVID-19. With that, we're now ready to proceed to those next phases of the project, and per the procurement manual, it requires city council approval to move forth with the next phases of the contract, which we will start with the surveying and geotechnical engineering phase to analyze the soils out there, as well as we will continue our public involvement so that we can kind of refine the scope of work for the corridor. With that, I ask that you approve the memorandum of agreement as negotiated with Kimley-Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Small. I certainly am excited to get this project moving, and you're right, we've gotten delayed a little bit, but now's the time to get it kicked off. So, Mr. Vice Mayor, do you have any comments, questions?
No, I just echo your comments. I'm excited to see this move forward. I do think it's important for everyone watching, as Mr. Small pointed out, this is not a new project that we're taking on. This is a project that's already been underway. So I'm look forward to seeing it progress.
Mr. Maslin?
Aaron, hey, just could you refresh us again in terms of federal funding versus local funding for this project?
Yes, sir. We've actually, we transferred about nearly $2 million in federal urban funds that was transferred over. And so those dollars were added to the project. And then we applied for state aid revenue sharing funds. That was another $1.34 million. So it's roughly $3.3 million is grant money on the project, which is about 52% of the $6,360,000 budget for the overall project.
Thank you. Barb?
Thank you for that question. And just as a follow-up, Aaron, to Mr. Maslin's, so those funds that were transferred from state and federal, they are specific for this project, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
So even with COVID and other things going on, we can't say, well, we want to change our mind and move those funds around to somewhere else. So
no, and actually a lot of the new rules that were in place just prior to us receiving like the revenue sharing funds, we used to be able to move them around to other roadway projects, such as repaving or doing some other different things. There is no longer that ability to do without approval of the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and you better have a very good reason for doing that.
well, I applaud you for doing all of the long time work on this. As Mayor Pond said, I distinctly remember having a conversation with him and the consultants March a year ago, talking about some of the great ideas that Kimley-Horn had for revitalizing this street and area. So I'm really looking forward to getting started on it. No other questions or comments?
Similarly, I do not have any questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Small, for coordinating with Kimley-Horn for their updates to the road. I know that there are some businesses right by there that are really excited for some of the corridor improvements.
Good. So is there a motion?
So I move that City Council approve the Kimley-Horn Associates Memorandum of Agreement as negotiated, a lump sum contract value of $599,400.
I assume that was not heard by anybody else either.
Oh,
You were breaking up.
sorry. So I move that City Council approve the Kimley-Horn Associates Memorandum of Agreement as negotiated with a lump sum contract value of $599,491. Is that better?
That was
Thank you.
better.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, did I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey,
Aye.
Mayor Pons,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent,
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
Okay. So that takes us now to the open forum portion of our meeting. I see that there's 3 callers on, Mr. Barham. I assume that they are people that want to speak to the open forum.
Yes, sir. We have 3 callers on the line. We're going to bring them in the order in which they arrived. So the first, we'll start with caller with their number ending in 2324. You're unmuted and you're address City Council.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, City Council members. My name is Bill Carr, and I live at 316 Indian Springs Road. I and my wife have lived there for over 30 years. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share with you some observations and comments as it regards to the Neighborhood Balance Committee. Before I proceed, I want to thank Mark Barham for helping me click and log in to this virtual meeting. And then also, I want to thank and acknowledge the city manager and the director of planning who led us through the 15 months, 20-member regarding the Neighborhood Balance Committee, all those meetings. They did an excellent job. They brought in guest speakers, and I, as a member, learned a great deal, and I appreciate the opportunity to be part of that committee. My observations are based on 23 years of consecutive service to the city, 12 on the Board of Zoning Appeals, and 11 on the Economic Development Authority for the city. First, I want to share with you all that I support what you have deliberated before the open session regarding the Neighborhood Balance Committee. Specifically, a pause on the 4-person allowance, the trash can ordinance. I think it was shared in you all's deliberation that perhaps screening may be an issue, but overall, I do support having some sort of ordinance with the intent of and the objective of trying to get the carts off the street, not so much the day after or the second day after, but having them off the street 3 to 4 days after. Among the reasons, if they stay on the curb, some people can't park against the curb, and also some of the trash remains on the street that has spilled over from when they are dumped up into the truck. So I would support some effort to get the carts off the street. I also support the restructuring of the Neighborhood Relations Council. Also, the Certified Rent Ready program is a great program that, as I learned from what the city of Norfolk has, and it was discussed earlier today, I think would be very helpful. And then also adopt, I don't say a cop, adopt a police person program with the College of William & Mary. I do think that would be helpful on the overall having the students understand how important it is to living in the neighborhoods and having good relations with the neighbors. My following observations and comments pertain to Indian Springs, again, where we have lived for 30 years. And the neighborhood of Indian Springs has evolved over those 30 years. And we and other neighbors whom I've talked to thoroughly enjoy having the students part of that neighborhood. But what I'm about to share with you, I think you'll quickly see that there is an imbalance that has occurred over time. And so when Mayor Pons, in his comments and speaking to the Neighborhood Balance Committee and these initiatives, he was exactly right when he said balance and quality of life. And when I saw on the chart that there's only 4 units with the 4-person rule, I don't know if that is accurate. It may be accurate from the city's perspective, but in the real world, how many students are in some of these homes, I think it would be more than just 4 units. So let me help you a little bit by sharing this observation. And let me say that I may be wrong. This is my best educated observation of the number of units and the census, the number of people in Indian Springs. As I understand it, through my count, the population of Indian Springs, not counting children, is 158. And of that 158, 71 are homeowners. That would be the Carrs, Missy and Bill Carr, living in the 1 unit. And that represents 45%, and 87 renters. And to be sure, not all of whom are students. And that's 55%. So right now, again, 45 homeowners, population, 45%, and 55% non-homeowners. If one were to include the apartment complex that has 14 units and say there's only 1 individual in each unit, it goes from 158 to obviously 172. One does the math. You have the percent goes down to 41 homeowners percent, 41%, and then renters 59. And so right there it shows on a census or population basis an imbalance. If one were to look and quantify the number of units, the number of housing units, and I do include the 14 apartment units that's in that apartment complex near the top of the street, one comes up with 40 SFRs that are not rented and 42 apartment units and FSRs that are also rented. So it's about.
If I could, if you could wrap it up, we're over the 5 minutes. I'm sorry we didn't.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. And so right there is an imbalance. And so all I ask for you to do, please, is in your deliberations, I sent you an email. If you were to consider some of my observations and suggestions, I would appreciate it. Indian Springs and other in-town neighborhoods are very fragile, and I think we need to restore some balance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that and apologize for having to cut you off.
Next, we'll go with a caller with number ending in 4173. You're unmuted.
If I can just remind the caller to limit their comments to 5 minutes and state your name and address before you speak. Thank you. As you speak.
Thank you. Mayor Pons, members of the City Council, Mr. Trivett. I'm Julie Smith, 704 Jamestown Road. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today and for the technology which makes it possible to participate. I appreciate it. Since my husband and I moved to Williamsburg in 2017, we've given a lot of thought to what might bolster and encourage year-round residency and ownership and make our historic neighborhoods even a better place for families. We know there's been a lot of dialogue between the city and the college over the 3-person occupancy rule, and with a quick Google search, I counted more than a dozen articles on the issue in various publications going back to 2007, including the one Mr. Rogers referenced. We appreciate the hard work of the Neighborhood Balance Committee and the city staff in creating the list of goals, and also the council's willingness to consider them. I'd like to speak today in strong support of 2 of those 5 short-term goals. The adoption of the trash can ordinance, and plenty has been said about that, but more importantly, implementing a 3-year moratorium on the 4-person occupant exception. The temporary moratorium, while not a cure-all, provide an opportunity for the city to use the time to continue to take stock of resident concerns, of which there are obviously many, as you've all indicated you've heard from residents. More fully evaluate the situation regarding neighborhood homes increasingly becoming rentals. And most significantly, in my opinion, would allow for the community and the marketplace to absorb some of the new inventory at Midtown Row and High Street. As an added bonus, giving these properties a chance to succeed would go a long way in supporting local businesses that are part of these mixed-use developments. And we all want to see these businesses succeed. I was there the day Earth Fair opened with all of its excitement, and I really want to continue to see the Monticello Shopping Center flourish. Finally, the cost of hitting the pause button, in my opinion, on this program seems like very low for all the stakeholders. I mean, if only 4 exceptions have been granted in the last 7 years, hitting the pause button again seems like costs the city little. So finally, we just urge the adoption of these suggestions. I believe that a thoughtful and complete evaluation of these issues will be a critical component to preserving the integrity, nature, and charm of our community and downtown neighborhoods, and I believe should be the primary mission of the City Council. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, last caller is number ending in 3058. You are unmuted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council, for an opportunity to discuss some of the difficult issues I think we're facing. My name is James Penny. I reside at 209 Burns Lane, and I've been there since 2016, fairly early in 2016, actually. I'm a member of the city's Neighborhood Balance Committee and president of the Burns Lane Residents Alliance. I'm very much in favor of City Council adopting the committee's short-term recommendations, which will be very helpful. But more work will be needed to reverse the current trend of our close-in historic neighborhoods becoming primarily student rentals. Burns Lane is the only close-in neighborhood that is not more than 50% student rentals at this point. Members of the Neighborhood Balance Committee heard from a Blacksburg, Virginia housing official who described a close-in neighborhood there that is now 85% student rentals, where the remaining resident homeowners feel as if they are under siege. This is where our city will be if City Council does not start seriously addressing these issues. My wife, Pam, and I purchased our 18th century house on Burns Lane in early 2008, at a time when there were very few, if any, student rentals. We embarked on several years of repairs and renovations and invested well in excess of $1 million in the work. Student rental issues in our neighborhood have caused us to question whether we would have purchased the house and undertaken the work and considerable expense if we were considering it today. There are many noisy parties in our neighborhood, with neighbors having to deal with the noise and students spilling into the streets. In one recent case, the students partied on the roof of their rental house without masks or social distancing. We also have to pick up bottles and cans that are left in our front yards and in the side yard of the Christian Science reading room that's directly across from campus. The street sign at the intersection of Burns Lane and Goodwin Avenue was stolen this past weekend for the second time this school year. Many of the student rentals in our area have the appearance of small used car lots with a number of cars owned by residents and guests in the yard or on the street. Many of the student rentals have several trash cans that are left visible from the street and are often overflowing with trash. This is why the proposed trash can ordinance is very important. And I understand concerns about elderly residents and the like, but those elderly residents are undoubtedly able to call on others to provide assistance with that. I also think that the screening issue is fairly minor, and that's something that at most houses can be resolved relatively easily with the planting of some bushes or perhaps a small enclosure. Recent efforts to encourage families to locate into our neighborhood highlight the problems for the close-in neighborhoods. We tried to help John and Scotty Austin find buyers for their house at the intersection of Burns Lane and Goodwin Avenue. The house was moved from the Colonial Williamsburg historic area in the late 1950s and is an incredible entertaining venue. William & Mary's current business school dean advised that he is happy to be in Kingsmill, notwithstanding what a great location this would be for him. I also discussed the house with a former member of the William & Mary Board of Visitors who was planning to retire here. Her first question to me was whether there are any student rentals. And when I responded that there are, she said that they would not be interested in having to deal with the noise and congestion, and instead would be looking at houses in Kingsmill. Yet again, Kingsmill. The house is now a 4-person student rental with work being done to flip it. Our close-in historic neighborhoods are incredibly important to our city, but they will turn into student rental communities if we don't have cooperation among City Council, William & Mary, and the neighborhoods, and start seriously working on some solutions now. As I said, the Neighborhood Balance Committee short-term recommendations are an important starting point. And yet, let me mention, I'm particularly disappointed to hear all the support amongst some of the City Council members for the person exemption or allowance. To me, it really provides a very unhelpful incentive for people to buy houses for rent. Basically, you're able to charge a third more in rental income as a result of being able to qualify for that. There's additional wear and tear on those properties. We've got more cars and more traffic. So to me, it's really a situation that calls for change on the 4-person rule. The other thing on the trash can ordinance, and I'm about to run out of time, visible trash cans with overflowing trash being visible from the street make a very unpleasant neighborhood look, and it's really not helpful as far as our recruiting other permanent residents to our communities. Thank you very much. I am out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Penny. I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and to share your thoughts. Okay, if there's no one else, Mr. Barham?
No, sir, no one else.
I will close the open forum. I believe we have an item for closed session.
We do. I move to go into closed session pursuant to section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter pursuant to subparagraph 1 concerning the appointment to boards and commissions.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute recess and join back in the next link that's been provided.